Israel's minister says BDS is the new face of terrorism. Here is the new face of terrorism. They're also saying that it's also anti-Semitic. And so that's kind of rolling it up that, in fact, here we have a movement, the boycott movement, that has been organised by the Palestinian people as a way to peacefully protest what is happening to them. And what's happening now is that the Israelis are repackaging that as anti-Semitism and a new Holocaust. In fact, that's also what it's being called. And there are governments who are taking that on. In fact, it was Netanyahu that called BDS a new Holocaust. And I mean, just think about what that is saying. I think in terms of the debate that's going on at the moment, we know that people in the UK, if they used the Holocaust in that way, would be accused of being anti-Semitic. To compare something like BDS with a Holocaust, remember what a Holocaust is. It's the complete, utter genocide of a whole people. And what's really interesting about the Israelis is how they play this language game. I mean, if any of you have read 1984 by Orwell, it's extremely reminiscent of that, because what they're very good at is doublespeak. They will change things round. They will change things round so that the oppressor becomes the oppressed. So the perpetrator becomes the victim. And you will hear this line of victimhood coming out, being spoken by this regime, who are actually backed by billions of dollars worth of armaments and an incalculable amount of other governmental support. Because let's be frank here, as I said in the previous session, Israel is backed by much of what I will call the establishment. That's a very general sort of a term, but it's a term that takes on, shall we say, those who have the power. So what I'm thinking about in this session really is, what does it mean, therefore, to be an individual activist in this situation, or to be a group, like many of you are in BDS groupings, or you're interested in supporting Palestine in some way? Because I think we're going to see some, as Mal would say, some very interesting times in the next year or two on this. Because we know that the Israeli government is making huge efforts to have the BDS and all their activities banned and being made illegal. As I said in the last session, there's a bill coming up in the Senate that would mean you would be fined hundreds of thousands of dollars if you backed the boycott movement. I'm going to echo some things and say, I think what I want us to think about is not just about the Palestinian situation, but what this means for freedom of speech at all, in terms of the freedom to protest any regime that the establishment feels they want to endorse. Now this fight, what they call a fight, even the language that they use is extraordinary. The fight against the BDS, remember the BDS is a peaceful movement. The fight against the BDS is being led by Israel's Minister of Strategic Affairs, and he's talking about it as if it's a military challenge. He says their task is to build, and this is a direct quote, a community of warriors. I mean, it's extraordinary, isn't it? A community of warriors. But actually that is what they've done. If you look at the kind of harassment that I get online, much of it actually doesn't come from the UK, or a lot of it. A lot of it comes from Israel, a lot of it comes from America. From what I've heard, some of it is paid by the Israeli government, but some of it is also unpaid. Now, I've got no problem with people objecting to what I have to say. I've got no problem at all, but I do have a problem with some of the methods, both on the ground that have been used against me and some of the methods that have been used in the background. The truth is that although the boycott movement has made a lot of inroads, and we've seen a change in public opinion, including in the Jewish community, particularly with young Jews, so have the Israeli lobby. And we've seen that in the recent comments, for example, in the President of France, and the comments that he's made about BDS being anti-Semitic. And we've seen it as well in the moves to adopt these new definitions of anti-Semitism. And of course, it's a really strange, contradictory time. Because at one point, yes, we have Jeremy Corbyn coming in strongly as a figure nationally, but we also have Trump. And we also have the most pro-Israeli American administration that there's been for some time. So we see an American ambassador who has helped to actually fund illegal settlements, and a UN report on Israel that, of course, had to be very speedily withdrawn. Not because it wasn't true, but because America threatened to withdraw funding from the UN. So now what I'm going to do in this session, I'm kind of catching people up a bit with some of the things I said in the last session, is that I'm going to think about some of that narrative that's happened in the UK in the last couple of years. And this is what we're getting here. We're getting an echo of what's happening there. But it's not just Theresa May who is doing that, is it? It's also happening within the Labour Party. And I'm focusing on the Labour Party really for obvious reasons. One of which is that I am a member of the Labour Party, even though I'm now suspended for being anti-Semitic. But also that we know that Jeremy Corbyn has historically been a friend of the Palestinian people. So I want to kind of just focus on that a bit. I think we can imagine the conversation that actually went on in Tel Aviv when they found out that Jeremy Corbyn had been made leader of the Labour Party. You know, he actually became somebody who was potentially the leader of Britain. And Britain has been pretty supportive of Israel. And I have no doubt that in Tel Aviv they thought, right, we've got to do something about this. I've got no proof for that. Now what I've put up here is this thing about Haringey Council. Haringey Council is a Labour council. It's a right-wing Labour council. It's a Blairite council, because what we've got in the Labour Party is that we've still got a historical hangover from New Labour. So the membership is overwhelmingly pro-Jeremy Corbyn. But for example, many local councillors are still from that New Labour era. And not only are Haringey very keen on selling off their council housing, but they're just about to have a vote next week on adopting this new definition of anti-Semitism, which really involves criticism of Israel as being anti-Semitic. And they are actually whipping Labour councillors to vote for it. It's extraordinary. What I also want to talk about now is this organisation, the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism. I don't know if any of you read it last week. I think they were reported in The Independent, I think they were on the BBC, I think they were also at wide amounts of the media. They are a charity. I find that really doubtful that these people are a charity. This is just an example of some of the articles that this charity has published in the last year. In the last year, they had 73 articles suggesting that Jeremy Corbyn was an anti-Semite. They had, I think, about 30 or 40 about me. To be a charity, you're supposed to be, by the way, apolitical. Now look at some of those headlines there. Just go into their site and see what they're doing. But what they also do is that they do what they call surveys of the Jewish population in the UK. I also suggest have a look now and see what their survey is and what their survey questions are. I mean, anyone who's ever done data gathering would understand how biased their questions are. It's extraordinary. And yet, we have the BBC, we have the Independent, we have newspapers reporting their survey results as proof that there is a rise in anti-Semitism in this country. As proof. And so, for example, if you remember, I just said that I get a lot of, unpleasant posts on Facebook, but a lot of them are from overseas. They will ask Jews about the rise in anti-Semitism. What they don't account for is how much of that is coming from outside of the UK either. So this was all part of the attempt to smear Jeremy Corbyn as soon as he became a leadership candidate. And if you remember, before Jeremy Corbyn was the Labour leader, there was this man called Ed Miliband. You remember? And he happened to be Jewish as well. You remember that one? And the very same newspapers who are now suggesting and publishing material about Corbyn and Corbyn's administration being anti-Semitic were the same ones who published pictures of Ed Miliband eating a bacon... Sorry, can you not take that? Excuse me. Can you not take that, please? I'm not going to carry on while somebody's talking on the phone. I'm sorry.
Okay, but... Sorry.
It's just not acceptable. Can you turn it off, please?
Sandwich.
Thank you.
Bacon sandwich. Yeah.
Thank you. Eating a bacon sandwich. This was exactly the same newspaper who had quite xenophobic comments about Ed Miliband's father. Do you remember Ed Miliband's father who came over here as a refugee escaping the Nazis? And the Mail ran stories, didn't it, about the fact that, this man who never loved England. So, but what we can see here is it doesn't matter what your record is in terms of fighting racism. You can have as good a record as you like. The smears will not stop. And the mainstream media have really gone from it. They've twisted every single word they could. They've put things out of context. Now, actually, at the moment, I'm talking about Corbyn, not me. But you could read what's happened to me as well. Now, of course, there are anti-Semites out there. There's racism. There's all of that going on. But to actually suggest that this is worse in the Labour Party than it is in other parties, I find absolutely breathtaking. My partner, who is 68 now, who's been a member of the Labour Party for 42 years, an active member, says he can recall one incident of anti-Semitism, and I think that's when someone suggested that he would be best at looking after money because he was Jewish. That's it. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but what I'm saying is that this deluge of accusations against the left has one purpose alone, and it's not about improving race relations in this country. It's about undermining the left and undermining Jeremy Corbyn. Now, the interesting thing I find about this is that while we're told, I'm told all the time, because obviously I'm of mixed heritage. I have Jewish heritage. I also have African heritage, and Scottish, and a few other bits and pieces in me as well. But I'm always told, there are no hierarchies of racism. You cannot compare one genocide with another. I'm sure you've all heard that. And I'm sure we all accept that. But the funny thing is, there does seem to be a hierarchy of racism as far as the newspapers are concerned and the media are concerned. Because what I see and what I sense, both in the media and not in the media, but when I talk to people and when I'm going around and when I read things in the media, is not actually a rise in anti-Semitism. I don't see any anti-Semitism in the newspapers. What I see is Islamophobia. What I see is stuff about being anti-Eastern European, particularly at this point of Brexit. What I would suggest is that we've actually seen a sort of whitewashing of racism, where racism has become decoupled from power. In the good old days, when I was an anti-racist activist, that was part of the definition of racism, that it was about power. It was about one section of people oppressing another section of people. Well, that seems to have decoupled. So let's have a look now. We have here just some of the things that Boris Johnson has said, which he says blacks have lower IQs. He's also called black children pickaninnies with watermelon smiles. He also said this thing about Obama, didn't he? That you couldn't expect, it was something like you couldn't expect Obama to be objective because after all his father had come from Nigeria or something like that. Now, isn't Kenya, sorry, yeah. Can you just imagine the deep racism in the Conservative Party? Yet, what do the press do with him? At worst, they say, oh, that's our Boris. He's a bit of a lad, our Boris. And then they make him Foreign Secretary. Now, definitions of a witch hunt include the practice of making unfair allegations and of unfair investigative techniques in order, and I'm quoting here, this is a dictionary definition, to restrict dissent or political criticism. Now, as I said, I've been suspended from the Labour Party twice. The first time for anti-Semitism, and the second time it wasn't actually for anti-Semitism until I got to my hearing, and then they put in the anti-Semitism stuff. And by the way, I actually do agree that the term Zionism should not be used as a term of abuse. But I do think that people trying to say that we shouldn't use the term Zionist is extraordinary. Zionists use the term Zionism. Zionism is a political ideology. And I will not stop saying Zionist or Zionism when it's suitable for that to happen. Now, it's interesting that actually my conversation that I was first suspended for was actually around the boycott movement. Now, if you think that comment was just taken, somebody just found that by accident, no. Somebody went in and they trawled for it. They did what they call fishing for it. And there's an organisation who did it who are called, and it always sounds like apple pie, these organisations. They're called the Israel Advocacy Movement. And their job, they say, is to defend Israel. And they defend Israel by going into the accounts of people like me and taking things totally out of context. Now, all of the newspapers, if you remember, ran the story, as did the TV. And they were all happy to take the Jewish Chronicles version of what had happened. Not one of them asked me for the story to be checked. That is, by the way, normal practice. It's normal practice. When I went to Scotland, every single newspaper checked their stories with me before they printed. And I keep on asking reporters, why didn't you check your story with me? Why didn't you? I don't get an answer. Now it kind of built up into a sort of, I don't know how many of you are aware of it, it was kind of a real storm of like, kind of finger pointing at, racist, but it really reached the most ridiculous climax when this happened. You can't quite see it, but it says, Farage for Breitbart. That's the paper that he used to write in with the people who are now the chief assistants of Trump. He says, the left are Jew-hating, anti-Israel extremists now run the Labour Party. Now this is Nigel Farage talking about racism. Now, there is a good reason that, of course, Nigel Farage has a particular little corner in his heart for me, which is because I was one of the people who organised in South Thanet to keep him out of Parliament. And he really, really didn't like it at all. But to have somebody, can you imagine, like Nigel Farage calling me a racist is breathtaking. Now, had I gone silently, I think that would have been the end of it. I'd have been, I don't know, cooking lunch today instead of talking to you. And I was told by a number of people not to speak anymore, particularly, the chair of Momentum. So do not say anything anymore. Enough. But that's how it works, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's exactly how the power of this lobby works. So I received this deluge of racist comments. Meetings I was due to go on were picketed. Facebook accounts were hacked. And then I was suspended a second time when I went into a meeting, and I know this might sound a little bit kind of detailed and boring, but this is an important point. The second time, this was a meeting that was secretly filmed. Secretly. That means covertly. And I'm saying that because this was part of a training session. Now, I don't know, I've been a trainer. I've also been part of training sessions. And part and parcel of being in a training session is that everything that happens in the room stays in the room. Okay, so that's one thing. But worse than that, this was within the Labour Party conference. Everybody who was there had to be a Labour Party member. I have been told the name of the person who did that filming. They're a prominent member of the Jewish Labour movement. They sent that edited film to the newspapers. Now, I was accused of bringing the Labour Party into disrepute for what I said at a private, confidential training session that only Labour Party people were supposed to be in. I've told the Labour Party I know that person's name. And do you know what's happened about that? Nothing. In fact, from what I've heard, that person has recently stood as a local councillor. Now, the Jewish Labour movement are lobbying this year for a rule change in the Labour Party. And that rule change would mean that you would be expelled from the party for making criticisms of Israel. I mean, it's not quite put like that, but that would be the result of it. Have a look. I can see people shaking their head. Have a look, Jewish Labour Movement, motions to conference.
We've got that video coming up, actually.
He's got that video coming up just now.
Could you just say what it was again? I'm sorry, I don't think. What was the rule change?
The rule change is going to be the definition of anti-Semitism and making a whole lot of comments about Israel making them things that you would be kicked out of the Labour Party for. So actually making that link between criticising Israel and being anti-Semitic. And once they get that through, they will use it. I mean, be sure they will use it. Now we can see the way that these things are happening within the left and the Labour Party. So for example, last year, Tom Watson, who went to a Labour Party Friends of Israel dinner and called supporters of the boycott movement immoral. Immoral. Now I've got no problem with somebody saying, I don't agree with what you're doing, but I do object. How dare he call me immoral? Now Al Jazeera, if you want to know more about this, have a look at the documentary they did. It's called The Lobby. I'm in programme 2, but one of the best programmes is programme 3, when they show you what happens to just an ordinary activist who goes to the Labour Friends of Israel stand and asks a simple question, and this question is, are you for the two-state or the one-state solution? And the person says, I'm for the two-state solution, and the activist says, well, how can that happen if there are, I mean, I'm paraphrasing here, when Israel keep building settlements, what are you saying about settlements? What happened to this person is that she was accused of being an anti-Semite. She was suspended by the party. Her husband at the time was seriously ill. I had a number of phone calls with her when she was absolutely distraught. Now, I haven't got a job to lose, and my children are grown up. But that's not so for other people. And it's been traumatic enough in my family, for example, that my daughter, who's a doctor, and my son, who's a social worker, nobody at work knows that I'm their mother. And they are continually worried about me. Now, what I'd like to say about this is that being a racist is not about missing off one word, or getting one word wrong, or even calling Hamas when you're at a meeting our friends. Being a racist is about the context as well of the life that you have lived. And we are moving into highly dangerous grounds when one section of the party can point to another, one section of the society can point to another and say, by using one word, you are a racist. And I'm saying that because I have yet to hear of any people from the right wing of the Labour Party being suspended for calling people names. I'm yet to see it. I'm sure that it must have happened and it might have happened, but I haven't seen it yet. Now, organisations like the PCS are crucial, and they're not just crucial for Palestinians, but they're crucial for all of us, because if you like, they act as our standard. They act as standard bearers for what it means to defend human rights. If the establishment manage to smash this movement, they will do it again and again and again. And I urge people to not just keep supporting, but to, if you like, up the gear of their support. We're entering a very crucial time at this time. And as far as I can see,